Well, it's a great pleasure and an honor to be joined by one Celeste Marcus, managing editor of the great journal Liberties. I've previously had Celeste on this program, along with one Leon Wieseltier, editor of said journal. Aside from being the managing editor of Liberties Journal, she's also a remarkable essayist in her own right, as well as a great painter and the host of the associated podcast, Liberties Talk. And I do hope that introduction suffices for the time being. How are you, Celeste? Thank you for being on this show.
I'm very well. I'm very happy to be here. Thank
Awesome.
you for having me.
Yeah, the honor is all mine, and I'm very happy that you got to join us. Um, so the main topic of our conversation is your recent essay on the Liberties Journal website, which I believe, as of right now, is free to read. It's not paid
Yeah, it's in front
as
of
of
the
yet.
people.
All right. The essay is titled "Mortifying," and it deals with the very morbid topic of feminine self-mutilation. Yes. But I should like to begin by telling you that yes, I have before starting this program, I've already told you this, but since we're recording, I tune into your Library of Congress symposium, which you held with three other essayists and journalists who have contributed to Liberty's journal. And in case our listeners and viewers miss it, what was the symposium or discussion panel about?
The subject of the discussion was, I mean, the assigned theme was the essay. But I was on the panel with me were three writers, all of whom have, as you said, written for Liberties, and they've all contributed essays. Morten Høj Jensen, Becca Rothfeld, and Sean McCreesh. And Becca and Morten are essayists, but Sean's a journalist. He does long form journalism. So we did talk about the essay, but I wanted it to be a broader discussion about writing long form in the digital age. So that Sean could contribute just as much as the others, and also because I think I thought the subject was more interesting than just a long meditation on the essay, and I thought that the conversation was really interesting. So
Mhm.
if listeners haven't seen it, they should check it out.
Yeah, and I believe again, I finally got to learn how to pronounce the Danish guy's name, Morten Høj Jensen.
That's
Um,
right.
yeah, I've actually read two of the three essays written by them, Sean and Becca's, and they're remarkable. And I look forward to reading Mr. Jensen's essay as well. Um, but what I didn't get to hear was your thoughts on the essay as, a form of, well, long form written thought. I think, as we've discussed in our previous conversation months ago, it seems today that, much of journalism and opinion writing has taken a very nasty partisan turn where you don't get much thought-provoking or insightful writings anymore. And it's all pretty much a form of partisan swiping at the other side. And so do you find that the long form essay may provide a remedy for that?
I think it's certainly possible. That's why we use the form that we use, or it's one of the reasons why we do. And I do think that there are as I mentioned in the panel discussion, there are a number of smaller publications that are cropping up all the time that do have long form essays. I mean, that's they. I don't think that any of them are as long as ours. Ours is very long. We average 400 pages an issue, 350 to 400 pages. But each essay themselves, they're averaging about 2,000 words, 2,000, 3,000. I think that's enough to provide, room for nuance.
Mhm.
It's really just about what the editor and what the writer wants So I think the essay can be an opportunity to get away from this partisan swiping, as you called it, but I think you also have to be edited by somebody who wants that, and you have to have a writer who is trying to do something aside from signal which group that they're a member of. And if you don't have those two things, then you can write at any length and it wouldn't make a difference.
Yeah, I think I think a problem that plagues your politics and my culture, perhaps even more severely, is that people don't read anymore. People have failed to pick up the habit of reading and then thought about what they've read, either when reading the classics or again long form essays. I wonder if you share this, observation.
No, I'm sympathetic to the observation. I'm 26 years old. So if there was a time when a lot of people were reading, I don't remember it. If there was a time when, the average person wasn't going to be daunted by a doorstop for a journal, then I don't remember that. But all of my friends read. And I certainly do think that I know that what we're doing is countercultural. I know that the average person is intimidated by long essays, but I also know that we have a lot, there are more natural readers for Liberties than we're ever going to be able to find. And so I'm not despairing about whether or not there's a market for this. I mean, I don't think that thoughtfulness is never the dominant characteristic of any generation. And it's always, it doesn't skip generations either. So it's like, it's never going to be most people, but there will never be no one. And as long as I know that there is, I believe, and I think that this is just true. I don't think this is just like a Hail Mary. I believe that there is a significant readership that is looking, that is, as you describe it, sick of this partisan swiping and really just wants, they don't trust it, and they're looking for something more intellectually nourishing than what they're being provided. Um, so I guess I'm less despairing than you are. I don't think that no one reads. I think that there are people who read, and those are the people we're writing for.
See, well, I guess it's probably because we are brought up in different cultures. Because I know that in my home country, I know people who have never read a book in their lives, and I can be very sympathetic to that. In that, many of them are from rural areas, but there are those who are very much urbanized, who go to the same school as I do and who take the same subjects as I do, but they've never find much in terms of extracurricular reading. So, um, but onto the topic of essay writing, how did you come to find, I guess, your own voice, or I guess your own form of expression via this wordy form?
Um, I guess I started at Liberties right after college. So this is the only, I became a writer in this form. It's definitely a more natural form for me than writing quickly. I mean, I guess when I was in college, I was writing pieces for like the school publication, which were averaging like, 700 words. It's like very, very short. I could not do that now. Um, but I started a journal when I was in college, also shorter, but not as short as like the college newspaper. And then I started working for Leon when I was in college, and I was a research assistant for him on a collection of his essays, which hasn't been published yet. But I I learned how to write in this way by reading him, really. And then I got the job right as soon as I left. So this was always like, this was the form that I grew into. And it's definitely the one that I'm most comfortable with now. I mean, when I write for other places, or I mean, I'm working on a book now. And any other length is just like, it's difficult for me. My writing metabolism has just been adapted so completely to the way that Liberties is structured.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah.
I see. Yeah. I'm guessing, being a writer, you must have read a lot. Um, so what are some of the titles you are reading right now?
I just started a book by a woman named Linda Kinsler, which is called Come to This Court and Cry. And it's in it's like a murder mystery about the Holocaust. But it's also a really profound and fascinating meditation on our relationship with memory and with justice. She's going to contribute to our pages. I think she'll be in the next issue or the one after that. And she is a fascinating writer. She's a combination that is really exciting as an editor. Is like she has the sharpness of a journalistic mind, but the profundity of a philosophical mind.
Mhm.
And reading her is just really delightful. So everybody should get that book. It just came out. And then because I'm working on a book, I'm working on a biography of Chaim Soutine, so I kind of ration the books I'm allowing myself to read that are not directly related to that project. So I'm reading a lot of French art history and French history and biographies or monographs on Soutine, things like that. I mean,
Mhm.
I actually like I had my laptop on a stack of books, and they're all Soutine books right now.
Mhm. Now, I should like to point out that you describe I'm guessing, a novel about Holocaust survival as a delightful read. So it's a very rare description, but still.
It's
Um,
not a novel.
oh, I see.
It's true story actually, but it's exciting to come into contact with the mind that works in that way. The
Mhm.
story itself, I guess, is not delightful, but the way that her mind works is exciting.
Gotcha.
As an editor, anyway. I don't know if anybody else would read it that
Hmm. Um, so moving to again, I'm glad you mentioned your influence, French cultural influences. I know that my home country of Vietnam is very much influenced by French culture and the language and such. But I wonder if how I'd like to hear how that that part of the world influences your writing and the way you look at the world philosophically and such. Hello?
time. Sorry, it froze. I didn't get the question.
But yeah, I what I was just asking is that how does French culture and philosophy and art influences your writing and art and I guess overall general outlook?
That's a good question. I know that it does, and I've like realized, I guess the way that the project in general influences my relationship with the subjects that matter to me is that I'm part of my mind is always in a different era. And I think that and trying to adapt to a different language. And that gives me distance from the subjects that would otherwise feel too close to me to be able to contemplate with any kind of perspective. So, a good example is this essay that I just did for Liberties, which is mortifying, which you mentioned. Um, I allow myself to read, I guess the reason that I would like let myself read Simone de Beauvoir, the reason that I would let myself watch movies with Isabelle Huppert is because I'm like making myself be immersed as much as I can in French culture as in for this book. So like a lot of the movies that I watch are French, in part because I really do love French cinema, but also because I want myself to be like as exposed to the language as I can be.
Mhm.
And so subjects like female self mutilation, which is a subject that it's painful. It's a subject that I have tried to think clearly about for a really long time and tried to find work that shed some lucidity on it for a long time. Um, it's easier for me to get at that subject through French and through works that are like several decades old because it's not crowded by the kind of like political signaling that I think a lot of contemporary feminism is. Um, so I think yeah, that's probably true of Hebrew also for me, but French too.
Okay, of course. Well, we should get into the essay now, and the reason I do, I guess, be around the bush is because when I read this essay twice, and it is a very difficult one to get through. Not because it's badly written, it's very well written, but the subject matter is just um, it's it can you need to take a breather and such, and I perhaps
Yeah.
Yeah, but perhaps I do guess that it is as difficult for you to write it, uh, perhaps even more difficult than it is for me to read it. So, yeah, do
Mm.
describe the difficulties that you encounter as you craft this magnificent piece of writing.
Thank you so much for that description. Um, it's interesting that you say that. I was just rereading it to prepare for the podcast, and I did think, oh my God, I really made this hard for people. It is difficult to read. Especially, I mean, I start with such a difficult scene, and I did that on purpose. I mean, I wanted it to be shocking. I mean, not shocking, and like I wanted it to be, incendiary, or you know, it wasn't a cheap shot, but I wanted the pain to be visceral for the reader, because it's just such an insane, painful compulsion, and it's so common. So it's easy. It's interesting to me that that scene in the piano teacher, which is, I'm just going to describe it for people who haven't seen the movie. And the movie, actually, in general, I didn't like very much, but that scene,
Okay.
this scene was just like revolutionary for me. Um, and the essay begins with a description of the scene, which is of a woman in the scene. This woman is in her bathroom, and she's wearing just a bathrobe, and she opens it, and you don't see her naked body. You just see her in profile sitting on her bathtub, and she has a razor blade in her hand, and she picks up a hand mirror and positions it so that she can, like, in between her legs, which are splayed, and she cuts inside herself, like inside her vagina. You don't see any of it. All you see is the blood. Um, because it's in profile, but you know that that's what she is doing, and it's shocking. The blood is shocking. It was surprising to me how, discomforting it was for me, because I've seen women cut before. I've seen women bleed. I've done it. I mean, I did it when I was in high school. Um, Close friends of mine had scars all over their body, and so it was strange to me that it was so painful for me to watch it. But I guess it was like seeing it out of context and seeing it, it just felt like something that should be considered. It's just such a common thing. I mean, it's not like all women do it, but enough women do it that it should be something that people generally have to consider. Why is it not a thing that people talk about more? Why is it not a thing that is taken more seriously? Um, so that scene was really, I don't want to use the word exciting, because it didn't feel like a good thing, but it felt like it was respectful of this compulsion. Um, and that's why I wanted to start with that scene. But yeah, like the question that I was trying to consider in the essay is just, why is this a thing that's done? And to establish also that it is a common thing, and it has been a common thing for women to mortify their bodies for such a long time. So yeah, I mean, I felt like this was an opportunity for me to write an essay that I had wanted to read for a long time. I'd wanted somebody to make sense of this for me, and I have just never seen. I've tried to assemble different works that I've encountered that did treat the subject respectfully and did shed light on it, although I felt like I had to put them together and then try and make some sense of them, because I don't think that any of them treated them directly. So I used the piano teacher, I used the Walker Bynum studies about female saints. And then, of course, I spent a long time with Simone de Beauvoir's novel, Inseparables, which I loved. And I have read it several times. It was posthumously published and then translated like 2 years ago. And for some reason, just has not been given the attention that I wish it had. But I cry every time I finish that book.
Mhm. Yeah, so according to your essay, the adjectives in which you use to describe that particular scene in the film, the piano teacher was a title, Isabelle Huppert is the star, and Michael Haneke is the film director. I've wanted to watch that movie for a long time, mainly because I'm fans of
Oh,
both of them.
really?
Yeah, both of them, Michael Haneke and Isabelle Huppert. I actually
Have you read the book?
no, I've not. I've heard of I've heard that the movie was
It's
based on a
terrible.
book. Yeah. But
I hated the book.
okay. Well,
Don't
that's
read
okay. Well, I guess saves a bunch of time for me then. But
it.
I'm going on a tangent here, but I was in a cafe in downtown Hanoi, and they have a like a small bookshelf in which you can pick off and I guess peruse, and I saw a collection of photographs of one Isabelle Huppert, Madame Huppert herself. Some of them was taken by one Pierre Lindbergh. He's a great photographer, and it's very funny because at the time I was carrying a book of myself. Leon generously gave me his copy of the book that he wrote years ago. Was it
Kaddish?
Kaddish? Yes,
Oh,
and I was reading it, and I was looking at that Isabel Huppert photo book, and I thought of you, and I thought of the conversation that we had. Corny as it sounds, but yes, the again the adjectives in which you describe the piano teacher movie, which are corny is not one of them. You said that it is grotesque, revolting, and wrenching, and yet it is at the same time emphatically thrilling. And I think that's what I think about Isabelle Huppert and her tendency to play such complicated female characters. I said I'm a great fan of her, but I haven't seen too much of her works. I think my most memorable performance of hers is in another Mikhail Haneke film, Amour.
oh, I haven't seen.
Yeah, I believe Emmanuel Riva was in it, and she's blew me away. But yeah, speaking as a greater fan of Isabelle Huppert, how do you perceive her best works as an actress?
Uh, I think that she is haunting and gripping in the way that a cipher can be gripping because she is always impenetrable.
Hmm.
Um, and she doesn't give a lot of interviews about her acting. She will like she'll talk about herself, sort of, not very much, but she doesn't really talk about like her method. Although there was like a short interview that she gave in which somebody asked her about method acting, and she said that she thought it was bullshit. But um, what she did say once, which I found really enlightening, was that she never thinks of backstories for her characters. She's
Mm.
not acting a person, she's acting a scene. And so in each scene, when you're trying to figure out what she's thinking or why somebody would do the insane thing that she's often doing, or how someone could be so cold, um, the answer is that she's not trying to convey a full person. She's trying to convey a moment or a feeling. And I think that once I heard her say that, it made me understand much more um, what about her was so enigmatic and exciting, because it's the fact that she's just so opaque. She does things that feel like something that a person shouldn't be able to do. And the reason that she's able to do that is because she's not playing a person, she's playing a feeling. So I think that that's really captivating, and I think it allows her. I mean, obviously, she's excited by playing women who are really screwed up, and to doing things that are really grotesque. I mean, I think in a lot of her movies, she does things that are just painful. They're difficult to watch. I mean, she makes it hard on you. Um, I know that she did like some kind of one woman play of the Marquis de Sade. I think it was like she did Justine, which is I I hate de Sade, and I could only imagine her doing it. I mean, who else could possibly do something like that? So this is the kind of thing I mean, where she de Sade is so hard to read because it's so brutal, and there is a brutality in her acting that I think she must have a very bleak opinion of human nature, or she must be excited by the brutalities that people are capable of. but I've never heard her talk about that. And for all of these reasons, I'm just kind of addicted to her. I mean, I just I want to make myself watch her. Um, I guess because she treats these things that are so difficult for ordinary people to deal with and to conceive of,
Mhm. Yeah.
like this.
Mhm. Yeah, you just gave me a couple of things that I want to reflect back on. One, you just gave me one more reason to be a great fan of Isabelle Huppert because, like her, I hate the method. I think it is, I think it is
Uh,
overrated. It's probably the most overrated thing an actor can do. I think the reason why certain I think the reason why so-called method performances work is because of the actor's natural talent and not because they spend 5 years, preparing for the role of serial killer by, I guess, actually murdering people. I know that Mads Mikkelsen said that, and I was going to paraphrase that. And yeah,
That's
and
fine.
yeah, and secondly, oh boy, secondly, on the topic of womanly self-harm, as I put it, I'm reminded of a very terrible show, and oh right, I was remember the point I was talking about, Desaad. Um, I think this is another reason why I hate the storming of the Bastille, that event, because it unleashed the dark genie that is Le
Yeah.
Marquis de Sade into the world. And I know that I have a friend in Canada who also subscribes to your fantastic journal, who actually really likes the Marquis de Sade, and yeah, which is not something that we have in common. But again,
I would love to talk to somebody who really likes the Marquis de Sade so that they could account for themselves. I mean, I would like to say I've tried, but I've read enough of it that I guess like, I will allow myself. Usually with writers that I don't like, I don't usually just say I don't like them because I haven't read enough of them because I don't make myself read things that I don't like, which is a difference that I have with a lot of my friends. Usually, if they start reading something, even if they don't like it, they make themselves finish. But I just feel like there's so much I haven't read. I'm not going to make myself read something I don't like. The
yeah.
Marquis de Sade, I have made myself read
Mm.
because so like Simone de Beauvoir wrote an essay defending him. Too many Baudelaire loved him. There are too many people I respect to at least feel as if he has to be worked through, and he does. I mean, he was significant enough that he has to be dealt with. um I just don't, I guess I don't respect him, which is,
Me neither.
or
Me neither.
yeah, okay, good.
He's
I,
deplorable human being, that guy, and
yeah,
very disturbed, very disturbed.
totally disturbing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and a bad writer too.
I think he's a bad writer. Maybe it's better in the original French, I don't know, although I've heard that it's not.
Hmm. Yeah, and so again, excuse my scattered brain mind, but going back to the topic of womanly self-harm, my mind thinks of this terrible Netflix series, 13 Reasons Why, which is based on a best-selling novel.
Oh, yeah.
It's about a girl a high schooler who kills herself, and she records a bunch of tapes, and each one of them is attributed to a one of her high school peers who she blames for her own suicide. And part of the reason why I thought it was terrible is because like many forms of shows and films these days, it glamorizes a very difficult and very difficult and unstomachable topic such as that womanly self-harm. And I find that in instances in films as well as in real life, these topics should be treated with the utmost sensitivity and intimacy as possible, because we never see,
Mm.
you know, if we do see someone who has done such, you know, auto mutilation behavior, we overly see the scars or the freshly cut wounds rather than themselves actually, taking a razor and causing themselves harm. And so, yeah, tell me about this. tell me about this intimacy that perhaps you perceive in these examples of self-abuse or self-mutilation. Yeah.
You mean when I say moments of intimacy in the essay?
Yeah.
Is that what you're
Yeah, in the
referring to? That,
essay.
yeah. Um, Look, I think that if somebody trusts you enough to show you their scars, um, that means that sometimes if you agree to hear something, you're accepting a kind of burden of responsibility. And if somebody is showing you something like that, then whether you like it or not, you've been forced closer to them. So you have to respond in a very careful way. And you've been whether you wanted to be or not, you've been given a responsibility. So that's what I'm referring to. I'm referring to that specific kind of closeness. It's it's uh it's not easy to know what to do with it. It's very difficult to respond appropriately. And I didn't watch 13 Reasons Why. So I don't know about the
Right.
glorification of that pain. I heard about it. Apparently I think that the reception was largely negative.
Negative.
People thought
Yeah.
this was a glamorization of a kind of, yeah, just as you said, a
Hmm.
glamorization of self-mutilation. But I have been told by people, I did this to myself last night or something like that. And I've told people that. And so being being able to respond in a loving and supportive way, and also being able to do what you can to take care of those people, it's a skill that it doesn't come naturally to most people. Um, but that's what I'm referring to. When you see something, if you see somebody on the street and you like notice their scars, or if you see, a waiter who has scars, that just happened to me. You just like notice it's on their wrist. Uh, you actually have just been given an insight into a stranger that gives you a kind of access to their soul that you wouldn't naturally have. So all the more so if it's somebody who is actually telling you on purpose.
Hmm. I should like to, I guess, quote a passage from your essay, which I find very valuable, which really broadened my mind on something. In the case of girls, I'm quoting here, they will absorb the blame for most behaviors directed against them, whether it's a natural component inherent to femininity, a sense of physical helplessness, or a combination of both. Disorders of self-harm, for the most part, affects girls and women. These include cutting, anorexia, bulimia, and other self-harming behaviors. Males, for the most part, tend to externalize blame and emotional discomfort by acting out on others, from street fights to rapes and homicide. While we see crossovers in both genders, the patterns favor the classic models for aggression. End of quote. Um, I think
That's
not
a that's not my writing. That's a doctor. That's a
right.
psychotherapist,
Yeah.
Stephen Levincorn. Just want to say that because
Okay.
I'm not. That's a specialist
Right.
account.
Yeah. The therapist's name is Stephen Levincron, and yeah, I just quote that from your essay. But well, one, I think that not enough media, fiction or nonfiction, treats these matters with the kind of sensitivity and compassion and understanding that they deserve. But to focus on, the first part, um, I find that, there are typical two types of women and girls who are prone to self-harm behavior. I've in my readings of psychology and nutrition and otherwise, they are either from a strict religious household or they're from a upper middle class household. And I guess a commonality that they share is that they were not given much control uh, or autonomy, not merely as a woman, but as a human being. And secondly, they were, I guess, they were taught that being a woman carries with it, I guess, unbearable obligations. And at the same time, you know, they are told perhaps that that they cannot do the same things as men do. I wonder if that is an observation that you've perceived.
I, in my research for this essay, I found that there's increasing data that there is there are rates of eating disorders and self-mutilation amongst lower classes,
Mm,
women in lower classes. It's just that they're not reflected as much because they can't afford therapists, so they're not typically being sent to doctors. So I don't know how true that is. I mean, those statistics, because they're still really fuzzy. I've definitely a lot of the data from like 10 to 15 years ago did reflect that it was largely white upper class women. And now, so there is research that reflects that maybe that's not the whole picture, although it has for such a long time been the conception. I'm sure that certainly in the story that I recount in the essay, this woman who is absolutely being told that she has no right to have any kind of aspirations beyond mother and caregiver, experiences her femininity as a burden that is unbearable. And had she been a man, it would not have been.
mhm,
Obviously, because she wouldn't have had it. But I mean, she would not have had the same struggle. And there is this, um, I grew up in a religious household, so and I grew up in a community that was an Orthodox Jewish community does not consider a woman an intellectual being in the same way that it considers a man an intellectual being. And absolutely, there was. I mean, I was just having coffee with friends of mine yesterday who went to a wedding at which the mother said that her daughter, she had always thought that she would grow up to run the world, and now it makes her a little sad to see that she won't run the world because she's getting married, and so she'll be a mother instead, but at least she will run the home. And that, like, this is a conception that is not surprising for women who grew up in Orthodox families because it was always what we were taught. I mean, not my parents in particular, but certainly it was imbibed from the environment that I was in generally. Like, there was this expectation that we were going to get married young and have kids. And so if that's true, there's just not enough hours in the day to be able to be to be able to have full professional lives as well, especially if like you're getting married at 23 years old. So then there has to be some part of you that's being destroyed, and either it's the part of you that wants to be a mother or it's the part of you that wants to be a professional. And yeah, these two things can't coexist. um, I don't know if that's, I mean, that was certainly true in the Orthodox world that I came from. I think it probably is true to some degree outside of the religious backgrounds also. I mean, I see friends of mine who are not religious and who feel like they're going to stop working as soon as they have enough kids that they can't both be out of the house, and the husband won't make the money. It's far less than it used to be, but it's not non-existent.
mhm. Yeah, when I mentioned the strict religious household, I was thinking of those shows that Shira Haas was in. I hope I
Yeah.
pronounced her name correctly. One is unorthodox and the other is Stissel or
Yes.
Stichel.
No, you got it.
Right, thanks. And
It's Yiddish, not Hebrew. So it's just
and yeah, I do perceive that in such close-knit religious communities, I guess a woman is not given too much option and also too much burden. It is as if, to borrow an allegory of Christianity, a cross without a Christ. And that, of course, brings us to the your research into how female saints they they engage in self-harm behavior as a sign of self-abnegation. And I recently became a Roman Catholic. I was converted into the church. And uh, you know I'm I wonder, I wonder in your research, how do you perceive this connection between self-abnegation and I guess self-harm via form of starvation, self-starvation that these female saints engage in.
You know, I just thought it was a fascinating thing that there is this long tradition of women trying to. I think that it has something to do with transcendence, trying to make contact with something beyond themselves, or trying being frustrated by the limitations of ordinary human experience, and so wanting something that is higher than that or beyond the body. Um, and for female saints, that was naturally how starvation was interpreted. But when women now are starving themselves, they're thought of as just screwed up. And I think that that's a mistake. And that was what was so fascinating to me about that tradition. It was like this was about spiritual transcendence. Those women were revered in their time for what they were doing to their bodies. Um, and now I I think that these two things have something to do with each other. I think that being frustrated with the limitations of the body is a thing that women do feel now, because it's not just that they're melodramatic or silly or crazy. It is that they feel bound by their body in a way that is really frustrating for somebody who wants to get beyond it, especially for for a teenager, but for women's bodies generally. There is the womb functions in a way, obviously, for in a female body that it doesn't when it's not there. And so there's something in a woman's body that is preparing them to birth another creature. Simone de Beauvoir writes about this really beautifully in The Second Sex, um, in Biological Data, which is in the first section of the book. She writes about like what is happening to a woman's body when when a girl first gets her period. And the thing that's happening is that like suddenly for the first time, the body is not functioning primarily for you. And by you, I mean like the person with the body. Suddenly it's become like the thing that the body is at that point supposed to do is prepare itself to have a baby. And so it's like it's an experience that men will never have, that their bodies will always be functioning primarily for them. But a woman's body, when she's really young, when she's just a teenager, will start to function primarily for the child that it hasn't had yet. And so there is this dissonance between the person and the body that they have, and wanting to overcome that or starve it so that it stops kind of actually feels like a natural compulsion. And apparently it is. This is a thing that women have often done. Feeling like I don't want my body to adapt beyond me. I want my body to be for me. And one of the ways of doing that is halting periods in general. And so starvation does that. If you starve yourself, one of the first things that happens is you stop getting your period, because your body is conserving energy. It doesn't have the energy to do that anymore. Um, yeah. So I think that these two things, as I said, they're related. The saint is trying to transcend her body just as, the girl with anorexia is. I mean, not exactly the same thing, but these are tendencies that are related in a way that I think is often overlooked.
Mhm. I know that Liberties also published an essay by one Martha Nussbaum, and the title is On Not Hating the Body. And, perhaps the experience of, I guess, body hatred for a woman is very much different from that of, a male person like myself. And it's very much unique. And I understand that even though I cannot really fully comprehend it, I still sympathize with it. And that brings us to, the Beauvoir novel, Les Hommes Séparables, or The Inseparables, which, it's recently published, even though it's written a long time ago. You know, I've, um, I've had my contentions with Madame de Beauvoir for many reasons, but I've always find her interesting to read, and she gets certain things right about the contentious relations that men and women has had and still have, and I guess certain challenges that women face that me as a man do not have to face. Um, So the novel's central character is one Andre Guyot or
Girard.
Gillard. Okay, thank you.
Girard. I think it's Girard.
And a
Josh.
detail, I guess, again, what I know from everything I know from the novel thus far, I know I got it from your essay. And one detail that really struck me is how her mother um, seems to be a primary contributor to the conformity and the suppression that Andre grew up in and had to live with, until her life was tragically cut short. But that is why I have significant problems with, I guess, what we would call contemporary feminism. I would not dignify it by using the term third wave, is that it blames everything not to men, but to this vague construction of the patriarchy, which I assume, in their conception, primarily consists of men or not wholly. But the way I see it, if that is the case, then if there is such a thing as the patriarchy, then women, particularly women of the previous generation, like moms and grandmas and such, contributed a lot to it. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah, I'd like to hear from you, and I perhaps you can draw from personal experience to the extent that you're comfortable with of how, I guess, the role of older women in perpetuating, I guess, conformity to, I guess, a generation of younger women potentially
Yeah.
harm them, I guess.
I think it's a fascinating aspect of human experience that is often overlooked. Even though I think it's a subject that women talk about all the time amongst themselves. At least I have. Uh, I'm less skeptical of the term patriarchy, I think, than you are. I think that that
Mhm.
is certainly, at least in the novel, that is certainly what Andre was living in. And I think any serious person would agree that women contribute to patriarchy. And in this instance, the thing that the women are able to regulate themselves better than men can, but they're doing it for the men. So, and of course, so if the man is expecting that the women will be suppressed in a particular way, it's the women often who are doing the suppression, and they know how to do it because they were the ones who were suppressed as well. Um, so that was certainly true. It was certainly true of my upbringing. I mean, certainly not in my family, but definitely in my family became religious, like more religious as I grew up. And so the school that I went to was always more religious generally than my family, or at least it was more traditional. Um, so my teachers had been marinating in that kind of tradition much more than my mother was. My mother didn't come from that background and certainly like didn't expect I mean, she did not suppress me. But I learned how to do it from watching them. And, there are things that you can accept from women that are harder to take from men. So being told by other women, well, you don't need to talk because women don't need to be speaking in the front of the room because they're modest and sweet and really like we don't need to be rewarded for being in positions of leadership the way that men do. Like this is a thing that I remember being told really young and that I repeated. I believed it, which it's a way of like silencing them or making you be satisfied with a certain degree of like enforced inferiority. So the men can be rabbis because the men have to be rewarded with leadership positions, but the women are always going to be on the other side of the room, not leading anything quietly to themselves. I mean, women aren't allowed to sing. So, like, men should not be able to hear a woman's voice, an individual woman's voice. You had to sing quietly if you're going to sing at all. Like, these are things that I could definitely take much more easily from women than I could from a man. I mean, not least because the man shouldn't ever reveal that he's noticed you. So, like for example, I once had a rabbi come into a room. He was substituting for a girls' class, and some of the girls were sitting down, and when they sat down, their skirts would ride up enough that you could see their kneecaps. And so he walked into the room and saw these are like 14-year-old, 15-year-old girls. He walked into the room, he saw their kneecaps, he walked out and got a woman to come in and say, you need to pull your skirts down because we can see your kneecaps. And it's
Mhm.
like he couldn't be tainted by admitting that he'd noticed their kneecaps. But he clearly he had, so he got a woman to go and do that for them. And then we're ashamed because another woman has told us that we're doing something that is like tempting a man, a 65-year-old man who's, it was just, it was so strange. Now I think back on it, it was like, why? I mean, kneecaps? Like you're like telling 14-year-old girls that you're sexualizing them. I mean, I understand that this was the school dress code or whatever, but there's no other way to interpret it that like as a young girl being told um that their body is so provocative that a man can't be in the same room with them because they're going to be like distracted by their kneecaps. It's just, that's the kind of thing that I mean. It's like you really learn so quickly that you have to mute yourself because if you don't, you're being immodest in a way that's inexcusable. And I mean, it's certainly true for me. I think it is true for women generally that the displeasure of a woman you respect, because we're, I mean, we're trained to be closer to them, is just so much more unbearable than the displeasure of a man. So it meant more to us to be told by a woman in position of authority that we had done something wrong.
Mhm.
And certainly for Jaja or for Andre in the book, Jaja was the person who the character Andre is based on.
Real life
Um,
counterpart, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Jaja Andre loved her mother so much. Her mother meant more to her than anything. She wanted so badly to have her mother's love, and so when it was withheld because she was not fulfilling her role as a modest girl well enough, there was no more effective tool for enforcing conformity than having her mother say, "You're not doing the right thing." It wouldn't have worked if her father had done it. And I think that this is generally true of women, you know, like the displeasure of a female role model is just so painful,
Mhm.
uniquely painful. I don't know if this is, I would imagine that this is true of men for a male role model, like having a father figure whom you respect and whose admiration you so badly want be withheld from you because you are not being a man in the right way. I imagine that that would be very effective.
Yeah, yeah, and a few other examples of this control that older female figures can exert. I recently finished Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, and I find that the person who is the most concerned about the marriage life of her of the five daughters is Mrs. Bennet and not Mr. Bennet. And
Yeah,
in Liberties, there's an essay by the great Fuad Ajami, which recalls an incident where a young girl had to be, I guess, honored, killed in the Islamic tradition, and it is hinted that her mother was the one that did the deed, and of
yeah,
course, I've heard of Ayan Hirsi Ali's is piercing memoir, and I've heard that the people who are most responsible for harming her as a child were women. And these, and of course, what your example, makes me think that even though I have many disagreements with feminism, both in the second wave as well as contemporary kind, I'm very much sympathetic with it because one of the things, there are a list of things that, as a boy, I was not, I guess, told or commanded to, but I would imagine it would be very much different if I was raised as a girl, and 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 it seems to me that especially in very strict religious household, women are told that you know women are told that their sexuality is a dangerous thing and that they should be ashamed of it. I guess that is
yeah,
correct in your case. But So here's my question now is that you've in the concluding passages you've outlined, I guess, a conflict that feminism has with the idea of womanhood. I guess, for example, you can be a Sheryl Sandberg figure, and yet you still feel very much unhappy and very much alienated from, I guess, your femininity. because again, I would like to say here's my central disagreement with feminism is that in their quest for, I guess, liberation and inequality, they have renounced or repudiated, I guess, being a woman, what being a woman means, and I don't think those two are mutually incompatible. So yeah, uh, I'd like you to respond to it. I guess my question here is feminism compatible with womanhood? And so,
I think they're compatible. I just think they're not the same thing. I mean, I don't know if I agree with you that feminism, I guess there are strains of feminism that have a lot, like advocated for renouncing womanhood generally. I mean, I hope it's not true. I'm not like a Sandbergian, but I hope it's not true that you can't be a successful professionally and also be womanly. I think that it's complicated. Um, it's certainly complicated, but it's not impossible. Um, yeah, it's difficult. It's certainly difficult. And there will always be some aspect of your life according to which you feel like you're failing. Um, but I like these two these two virtues operate in different realms of a person's life. The same way I imagine it's similar to or analogous to the way that a man will have to sacrifice fatherhood to some degree, or often has to sacrifice fatherhood to some degree if he wants to excel professionally. Not exactly the same thing, because society has never expected men to just give up their professional aspirations in order to raise a family. I think that's like certainly that's changing now. Men are definitely expected to bear more of the burden of parenthood than they ever have before. But I certainly think that like it's possible to be a feminist and also be a full woman. And I wonder if like your contention with certain feminists obfuscates more sympathies that you have with like the broader movement. Um,
mhm,
but yeah, I think that there is there is a difference between feminism and womanhood, and there is feminism is a political movement. It's something that is advocating for political advances for women. But it's not going to teach you how to be a good woman. It's not going to teach you how to be a woman who can accept herself. It's certainly not going to teach you how to be a woman who's not going to cut herself. So there are things that one should expect from the feminist movement. There are resources that one should expect from the feminist movement to provide to women. But it's not going to tell you how to like vanquish the demons that will always exist in young girls' minds. Um, you have to be wise in order to know how to do that, and it's a kind of human wisdom that you have to accrue in order to advance beyond those kinds of demons. Feminism isn't going to show you how to do that. So I think that like that was the thing that was so painful for me, and this is like one of the reasons why I wrote the essay, is like there seemed to be this huge gap between the advances that I've seen women make and the women who I see excelling professionally, and the way that they just rip themselves apart when they're alone inside their own minds, and the standards that they hold themselves to when they're with men, and the way that they bend to their wills, even though these are women who are like in boardrooms or running meetings or on CNN or like, you know, absolutely excelling in every way outwardly, but privately, they seem to become a different creature entirely. And I couldn't understand this. It was like, why has feminism been able to provide them with the resources to advance in one realm but not the other? Um, and this was really frustrating for me. I was like, how is it possible that we're still asking ourselves the same questions we were asking ourselves 100 years ago? Why is it that so many of my friends who have been assaulted blame themselves for it? And why do they internalize all of this guilt when there has supposedly been so many feminist victories? And I think the reason is because that's not what feminism is for.
mhm,
Um, that is the difference. Like, that's feminism is not going to be able to assist in this particular conundrum. I don't think it's useless. I think it's very useful. And now with the overturn of Roe, I think it's more necessary than it was before, even though it seems like it's failed on a master scale. Um, but this is not a good that it can provide.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I'm a Catholic, so we're on different sides of the Roe issue. But that's an argument for another day. But allow me to elaborate on, I guess, my contentions as well as to add to what you've said. I know that two of the most famous or well-known or well-read texts in second wave feminist literature is The Second Sex, of course, by Madame de Beauvoir, and The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan.
Yeah.
And in it, this is according to my reading, they seem to argue that what makes a woman different from a man, uh, biologically, as well as some of the virtues that she excels at a lot more than men, say prudence or restraint, are contributing to, I guess, are contributing to their, I guess, second class status as citizens, inferior to males, and I guess their proposed solution of doing that is to repudiate these biological elements as well as these virtues, claiming that they were imposed upon them by men or the male-dominated society, and and in the
That's
wake
not
of
how I read The Second Sex. I haven't read Friedan in a long time, but that's not how I read The
okay.
Second Sex.
Yeah, you can tell me how you've read it, but as I've said, after Roe came down, there was a flurry of articles of women who, read by women, I believe, who was touting, I guess, some of the dangers and harms that pregnancy can cause. Now, of course, there is a risk that a pregnancy can result in the loss of the life of a woman, but this sudden surge in these articles signified exactly what I was fearing um, is that feminism, starting in the second wave, perpetuates this idea that you should repudiate womanhood if you wish to be on equal footing with men, as well as being liberated from male society. Another reason is that rather than taking their cues from the first wave feminists, I guess Mary Wollstonecraft and such, and the suffragettes, the second wave feminist takes their cues from, if not Marx, Nietzsche, and those two are, their opinion of women I wouldn't regard as high. So, um, please voice your disagreements with whatever I've just said.
Well, I told you I don't agree with your reading of de Beauvoir. I don't think that she's advocating for simply renouncing womanhood. In fact, like
Mhm.
she speaks eloquently about how trying to be both of these things at the same time is a difficulty that we will never overcome.
Mhm.
And she says that she thinks that with abortion, which is a right that she, as I believe, should have been accessible and was not when she was, I believe, when she was writing Second Sex, and other like political advances, there would come a time when it would be much easier for women to be able to fulfill both their roles. And there would be less and less dissonance between the two of them. So I just don't think it's right. I mean, she didn't think it was possible that you could just repudiate your femininity. And also, like, she begins The Second Sex with a biological analysis. So how could it be that she thinks that all of these things are cultural? She doesn't think that. She knows that. I mean, the differences between men and women are much deeper than culture, which is why she begins with a meditation on the body, which of course cannot be repudiated. Yeah, so I just think that I don't think that that's right for her. I think you're right that there were women who responded to the overturn of Roe by saying that you should never get pregnant. I recently wrote an essay, I think, voicing a different view of how one should respond to the decision. But I agree with you that there are. I think it's very dangerous to just dismiss all of the feminist movement by um, like pointing to essays or I guess articles that are a manifestation of the same proclivities that you were talking about at the beginning of the podcast when you said that these are just political cheap shots, and that they're supposed to be just catering to the most incendiary aspects of the culture wars. So, like, I think that most women don't think about themselves that way. I think that most women who are believe in the right to abortion are not pro-abortion. Which, I mean, there were feminists who were writing in response to Dobbs saying that abortion is like a good feminist thing to do, and I think that that is repellent to most women, even to most feminists. So I think it's absolutely a mistake to like extrapolate broadly from extreme examples, even though I agree with you that such examples do exist. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I've like I've said, I find many, feminist philosophers interesting, and they are certainly compelling. I agree with them on some points, and I think that they are off the mark on others. But nevertheless, I would recommend anyone, male and female, to read them. In fact, given your reading, I should probably go back to reading, these key texts of feminist literature. But I should like to close this discussion that we have, which I very much enjoy from beginning to end. Um, we have one thing in common in that we are discontented with how feminism is heading, or the state of feminism currently. And perhaps if you can bring the topic of your essay into focus, how should how should the feminist movement currently, I guess, uh, improve or reform itself, or do things differently in order to be, I guess, persuasive? And of course, I'm including, I'm including the pro-choice movement as well. How can, starting with the pro-choice movement, how can they devise, arguments that are fitting to the masses, even those who deplore the act of abortion?
I think that feminism has made a mistake that probably the Democrats broadly have made consistently, which is that um, they've catered to a very specific subgroup of the party, which is on social media and which is, you know, indulges in memes and cute tweets, which I think just really doesn't represent what most of the party wants from them. And so, you know, I mean, I'm sorry to like quote myself, but I just wrote this essay for a publication called The Point, which is also about a movie starring Isabelle Huppert, embarrassingly, about an abortionist who's guillotined during World War II for performing 27 abortions.
Right.
She's the
That is,
only.
that's a Chabrol film, yeah?
That's correct. Yeah,
Yeah, I
no,
should
very
watch
good
that.
job. Um, oh, it's great.
Oh.
It's on Criterion if you have it.
Mhm.
Um, I thought it was very, very good. And I really liked the way that it treated the subject of abortion because even though Chabrol is, I mean, he wouldn't, it's not a pro choice movie because he is not like cheaply making a propaganda out of a subject that is actually intensely human and one that should not be treated cheaply. So I really liked it for that reason. And the thing that I think emerges from that movie, which is clear to me, is that even if abortion is a morally complex thing and that there is a moral price to pay for allowing it to be legal, it is morally contentious or morally complicated, much the same way before it. I don't think that like a person is dying during abortion. I think that like I mean, depending on how late in the pregnancy you're permitting abortions to happen, but when abortion was broadly legal, federally legal in the United States, most abortions were taking place within the first 7 to 8 weeks when the baby was, or the fetus was still the size of a raspberry. So like, not by any, I think, medical account, a human baby. Um, so Still though, like I think that it is a mistake for feminists to behave as if abortion is not morally complicated, and if you behave as if it's not, which I think much of the stuff that's been published in like mainstream publications after Dobbs intimated that there is no moral complexity at all. It's just going to be impossible for most feminists who don't believe that to get on board. It doesn't mean that it won't be like a thing that people turn out in the midterms for. I think that they will. It already seems that they are. But it makes people feel excluded and it makes people feel as if the party is being run not for them, but for the most extreme iterations of the things that they subscribe to, but it makes them feel as if they shouldn't. So I think that like your articulation of the feminist movement today, most feminists would be repulsed by it, because it's not representative of what most feminists think.
Mhm.
And I think that's a shame. I think it's irresponsible. I mean, it's why of all of the Democrats who ran for president, Biden won, even though he was the least incendiary, because basically that's not what the American people want.
Yeah.
So it's a
Yeah.
utilitarian argument, but I also think that it's morally sound.
Mhm. Before, yeah, before closing our discussion, I should like to say that, you and I are, I'm guessing, on opposite sides of the American political spectrum. A, in the American context, I would be called a conservative, but, in the
A
Vietnamese sense,
Republican?
a small R Republican.
I'm independent. I mean, I'm registered independent.
Mhm. But nevertheless, we do not agree on many things. But I find that since starting this podcast and since bringing politics into this podcast, I find that the my favorite conversations has always been with people whose views do not align with me, especially on key issues, i.e., the moral merit of abortion and such. And two reasons. One, being exposed to very good reason arguments from the other side, I guess, helped me to reflect on views, my own views and what I believe in. And one compels me to craft better arguments, and two, for me to temper my own the views that I have, because since you live in DC, you are much more exposed to this than I am. Again, we've mentioned partisan hackery, and I've become more frustrated by the way in which, my so-called allies of the right, many of them, particularly those of my age, has you know has slipped into demagoguery and radical rightism, and and this is something that I spend more time thinking about and hopefully argue with than those who are radical and partisan on the left. And part of the reason why is because I've been exposed to, against very thoughtful comments and arguments from the other side, and you certainly helped me with that process. So, with that being said, this has been a very enjoyable conversation, and I thank you, Celeste Marcus, for giving me a lot to think about. And I hope you take care of yourself. And as a Frenchman would say, au revoir.
Au revoir. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Awesome.